Hello, Lions of Liberty fans. And you know, one great way to start out your day is with a shot of whiskey. But if you're not an alcoholic, the next best way to start your day is with an amazing cup of coffee. And now you can order coffee, delicious coffee, and also support the Lions of Liberty. We have partnered with Anarcho Coffee to create our own brand of coffee known as the Morning Roar. And let me tell you, this coffee is delicious. I am saying that as someone who just drank 2 cups of it before I recorded this pre-roll. So I can tell you, I'm a little hyped up, and I just had some delicious coffee. And I'd like you to be able to start your day the same way. So I want you to head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee. You get a 10% discount with your very first order. And if you join the Lions of Liberty Pride for $10 or more per month, which you can do over at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, you will then get a permanent 15% discount on all future orders. And you're going to want future orders after you try this, let me tell you. But first, give it a shot. Head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee and start your day with a morning roar.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
All right, friends, I am now joined by a set of great libertarian activists for a little semi-edition of Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor. Let's bring him in, starting with someone who's been on the show so many times that I have completely lost count. He is the founder of several activist organizations, including People Against the NDAA and We Do Better. Dan Johnson, welcome on back.
Glad to be back on, Marc.
Yes. And as we were discussing before the show, you come on the show anytime you have an announcement to make to the world. So here, a rumor that you might even have another one to make today. So I'm very excited to hear it.
I do indeed.
But not right now.
And you know, as a Pride member, I guess I actually listen to the show now too. So
yes, excellent. Yes, one of our newest members of the Lions of Liberty Pride, our supporters on Patreon, the one and only Dan Johnson. We're thrilled to have you here. And why don't you we'll get to you in a minute. I just want to do my introductions, then we'll go in. I'm the kind of host that works out how he's going to do the show as we do it live. So next up, we have the founder of the incredible edible. It's not edible as far as I know, but the incredible DonorSee app. I'm pleased to welcome back my friend Gret Glyer. Gret, welcome on back.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me. The timing is perfect for both Dan and I, Brent, with all of our announcements.
All the big announcements. Yes, that's
no pressure, Brent.
And no pressure at all. Yes.
Yeah, Brent especially. I can't wait to hear his.
Yes, this is the show where we laugh at in-jokes that started before the show even was recorded. This is the fun stuff. And as referenced there, lastly, but in no way leastly, he is making his very first appearance on Lions of Liberty. He is the vice chair of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina and the founder of the Liberty Coalition for Disaster Relief. I'm very pleased to welcome Brent DeRidder. What's up, Brent?
Hey, boss. Thanks for having me on, man.
Excellent. Now, longtime fans of the show will notice that a certain question was missing from my introductions to all of you, and I just figured I would just ask you all at the same time. I think I know the answer already, but I just got to confirm, are you guys all ready to roar?
Roar.
Yes.
Now, as I mentioned, this is a semi-edition of Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor. I am currently drinking a little bit of wine, and it's a Cabernet. I'm not going to name the brand. It's not important. I don't give out free promotions over here. I'm not in the charity biz like some of you guys are. But I'm curious, any of you are joining me today with the alcoholic beverages. Dan, I remember the first time you were on this show, or one of the first times you were on this show, we did a drinking show, and I asked you what you were drinking, and you just revealed that you were like 19 at the time. But that was many years ago, and you are now of age, so you can now freely admit if you're having an alcoholic beverage.
I will be willing to freely admit I'm actually going to be taking a shot of wild turkey in honor of the late great Chairman Richard Fry, who helped write a lot of the early laws that I worked on. So,
well, cheers.
Yes,
I don't know who that is, but he seems worthy of a cheers. Are you doing that shot right now? As we
absolutely.
I'm seeing the video, so I can confirm this is a rare breed. Dan is actually drinking whiskey. I'm so proud of you, Dan.
Oh, let's see how tall it pours.
From a law-abiding youngin to a whiskey-drinking activist. It's great to see. Cheers.
Cheers.
I mean, all right, Gret, what about you? What are you sipping on over there?
This is a Jack and Coke. I just got married this
Ooh-wee.
past September, and we don't keep a lot of liquor around the house. Other things,
Smart move.
but
Bad
but
things can
liquor,
happen
no.
when you do that.
But just for this podcast, I got some Jack Daniels. I can't even find the front. There we go. And that's what I'm drinking. Not the whole thing, just a few sips, but I'm enjoying it.
All right, and lastly, Brent, I know you don't really drink alcohol, but how are you?
I don't really drink alcohol very often. I am not sober. How are you?
I'm good, and the audience can interpret that however they like. It's sort of a postmodern statement. What is sober? I don't know, it can be whatever you want it to be. But Brent is not it, whatever it is. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm very excited to be doing this. Been trying to organize this deal for a while, and I'm glad I could get all you guys together. And we have been incorporating this format into our show a little more often here, this sort of loosey-goosey format where we just kind of kick back, have some drinks, and talk about some things. And I wanted to bring in people that are really taken a lot of action in I say in the libertarian community, but it's not like your activism is in any way relegated to libertarian community. Quite the opposite. You guys are doing work just in the communities that need help, in various communities that need help, whether they're overseas, like a lot of the projects Gret works on, or disaster relief here, and that sort of thing. And either way, you guys are all taking the kind of actions that help everybody. They don't help people. They're not just focused on a certain political group that we agree with, and that's why I really admire all the work you guys are doing, because you guys are demonstrating basically the philosophy that we spend so much time talking about here. You guys are showing people that it can actually work, and that not in a theoretical way, not that it can work, that it literally does work, and it's happening right now. So I just want to start off by cheersing all of you and applauding you for the work you've done in this community, so much so that you earned your spot in this prestigious program.
It feels so good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc.
Now, but thank you. Who am I thanking? I don't know why. I don't know who I'm thanking. The podcast gods that made this all possible today. But as we sort of referenced earlier, a couple of you have some interesting announcements. Maybe all of you do. I don't know. TBD. But I want to start with Dan because, as I mentioned, you, I think, have literally been on this podcast every time you have a new organization to start or a new announcement. When you get married, that will be announced on here. When you have a child, that will also be announced. We will do the naming ceremony on this show. Any major event in Dan Johnson's life will be eternally connected to Lions of Liberty. So, what do you got going on right now? I assume it has something to do with We Do Better, but maybe it doesn't. I'm going in blind here.
It does indeed have something to do with We Do Better. So We Do Better is about a year and a half old now. We launched in August of 17. And we launched with pretty much two missions, to connect people with organizations that deliver better outcomes than the government, and to empower people to send their tax dollars to those organizations. And on May 15th, we are launching We Do Better News, which is a weekly news show that focuses entirely on all the different ways that people, organizations, and companies are delivering better outcomes than the government. So, for example, in one of our shows, we had how you can use apps to stop the robocallers on your phone, and we don't need the FTC to
I want to know that one. I will be listening and downloading that one for sure.
We will sometimes, really the genesis of this show was we were doing disaster relief in Puerto Rico and in Miami. And we're sitting there with 2 million pounds of aid in a warehouse trying to get to Puerto Rico, and FEMA's blocking us. And at the same time, CNN, Fox, ABC, CBS, NBC are all interviewing FEMA about what we should do about disasters and how much solutions the government's going to bring. And so it's this ridiculous notion that most of the solutions are coming from people and most of the press is going to the government. And so we intend to change that. It's a half an hour news show. We'll interview guests. We'll do deep dives. We did a deep dive into volunteer firefighting on our first test show. So we'll get into serious stuff, but it's basically, we want to change the conversation around human needs. We want to expand it so that we're not just talking about House of Cards and, political drama, who said what about who. And we want to change it so that the government isn't the only solution in the news media. So half an hour show, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be launching May 15th. You go to wedobetter.org and sign up for more information.
Awesome. So is this going to be like a live show, or is it also going to be available as a podcast afterwards? Both kind of thing?
It's going to be a live show. So like last year, I asked you for a bunch of advice on podcasting.
Yes, I was just thinking, is this what this conversation was about?
So you eventually
behind the scenes.
Eventually this led to it's going to be a Facebook Live video show. So it's not going to be it'll be up there if people want to watch it later. But we're kind of cheating by doing it live, because then people don't expect all of the editing that they would expect from a recorded show. So
don't worry, I'm going to give them that same kind of show with this one. I'm not editing any of this. I'm going to give them a preview of what it'll be like. This is all for promotional purposes, of course.
Is the preview like all of us laughing at inside jokes?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much.
So far,
we do a bunch of funny shit before the show, then we laugh about it completely out of context during the show. It's a great format. It's really brilliant. I think it's going to take off.
It is great. So
it's called "We Did Funny" earlier, and you don't get to hear it in the past.
So for those who listen, you guys heard me announce the launch of We Do Better. We've introduced bills in a couple states on charitable credits, allowing people to send their tax dollars to organizations that deliver better outcomes than the government. But really, our number one focus right now is we realize that the examples we throw out examples like in San Diego, there's an organization called Saved in America, which finds missing children. I mean, people think that's the exclusive domain of the government, but this is an organization of former Navy SEALs, private investigators, and law enforcement, and they've rescued 70 children since 2014, and they do it at a cost of to the organization, about $7,000 per kid. They find them in about 9 days. You're looking at law enforcement. You're looking at $1 million, $40 million manhunt. They might find the kid, they might not. And this is just one of many organizations that we could say once. And when we said once, people were like, wow, that's awesome. But it doesn't sink in because the media is constantly covering government solutions. And so this is designed to change that narrative. And basically, whenever the government comes up with a solution, we're going to have a better one on the show.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Gret, we'll get to your announcement first, but I know Brent is just itching to give us his big announcement. I'm somewhat teasing, but really, Brent, I want to give you time now, since you have not been on the show before, to really introduce yourself a little bit more and get into mostly how you got into this disaster relief business, I guess you could say. It's not really a business, but how did you get into it? How did you end up forming the Liberty Coalition for Disaster Relief? What inspired it, and what kind of work have you guys been doing?
Okay. Well, so my daughter, who was 12 at the time, we were watching the news coverage of Hurricane Harvey, and it was pretty depressing and pretty sad. And we were talking about how sad it was. And she's kind of a go-getter, and she decided that we needed to do something about it. So we started talking about what we could do and maybe doing a fundraiser or a food drive. And it blew up. Libertarians heard about what we were doing, and what started out to be a very small, minor effort turned into something pretty big. And for Harvey, I think we raised over $10,000. We had rescue, and honestly, I've done absolutely nothing. I haven't done anything that I couldn't do in my underwear at the house. We've had other people doing so much, and guys going out into the water and actually rescuing people. And we experienced the same stuff Dan did, is FEMA wants to stop you and then take all the credit for everything. And we watched guys, libertarians, I say guys and gals, going down to Texas and getting around roadblocks and sneaking through with their supplies and making sure it got to the right places and actually doing water rescues. And one of our, you talked about us working internationally, which we haven't gotten to do yet, but one of our volunteers has done it and actually went to Puerto Rico. I guess that's international. Went
Close
to Puerto
enough.
Rico, right? To help out and did some pretty massive things there. And it's snowballed. It's snowballed because libertarians enjoy being the answer when someone asks, well, if it's not for government, who will?
And the answer is me, you, all of us. But they don't always like that answer when you don't explain it further. All right, and have you come up with a announcement in the last 5 minutes?
I was going to start a new news network, but I decided not to. We're actually, my wife and kids and I are moving on to a houseboat here in the next couple of months, and within the next 2 years, we're looking to launch and travel the Great Loop, which is up the Eastern Coast, across rivers into the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi, and into the Gulf, and then back into Florida. And the goal is to stop all along the way and help grow libertarian affiliates and teach people how to sell the idea of libertarianism. So,
well, that sounds like an announcement to me.
It totally is.
It might not be a world, I assume you talked about this with your wife before you before you announced it here. Honey, I was just listening to Lions of Liberty. Apparently, we're living on a boat. That's what's happening.
Yeah, no, I caught a buzz, and then you guys dared me. So, we've been playing it for a few months.
And everyone needs to donate to Brent's campaign for his houseboat. I think you have like a GoFundMe or something like that, or did I imagine that in my head at the same time as you weren't talking to your wife?
No. No. We're plugging along ourselves. We got it. But definitely when we get out in the water and start traveling, we will be spreading the good word and teaching libertarians how to sell the idea of liberty based on philanthropy for sure. So prepare to donate to Brent.
All right, get ready to roar, get ready to donate. Finally, speaking of places you're going to be donating soon, hopefully to the DonorSee app, to various projects. Gret, you also have an announcement that is actually not live as we speak, but will be live by the time this airs. So announce away.
Yeah, so the announcement will come tomorrow morning for our time, but will have already been announced by the time that this airs.
So
and it's and so for a long time, here's the announcement. For a long time, DonorSee has resisted the idea of embracing the 501c3 legal structure. Obviously, when you are a 501c3, donors get tax deduction, and that's a great thing. I'm glad donors get that, but there's also sometimes some inefficiencies that come along with that legal structure, which I can get into, but you kind of have to be a charity nerd to really appreciate that conversation. But DonorSee has resisted that idea because we want it to be as efficient as possible. And we've really been looking at our various possibilities, and we've discovered that there's a way to pioneer a brand new charity structure, and we're calling it hybrid tax deduction. And so starting tomorrow for us, some of the projects on DonorSee will have a tax deduction icon on them, and some of them will not. And the ones with the tax deduction icon will be 100% tax deductible. So you'll be able to donate to those projects specifically and get a tax write-off. And for the ones that don't have that icon, you can still donate to them. You can still help someone. But for people who don't line item their taxes, they're not going to care either way.
Yeah, and obviously you don't need to go, into all the nerd details, but can you just give like a simple version of why, like, how does becoming a 501c, if I said that right, how does that just add to like the paperwork, or are there just certain like conditions that a certain charitable project has to meet? I mean, what kind of complications does it add, and why did you decide it's actually worth maybe going through some of those? Dan's actually holding up a ton of paperwork right now, so I think this is a
yeah. Yeah, anyone who has started a 501c3 knows that the process just to start one takes months. It's not actually that weird. Like, I have a 501c3 organization that I started before DonorSee. I'm very familiar with the process, and I actively chose not to go down that route. And one of the biggest reasons for that is 501c3 organizations, because they can accept donations, and instead of an LLC or a business, they trade value for money, right? So you give someone a product and in exchange for money. A 501c3 organization, what they do is they trade money for nothing. You just give the organization money, and there's no expectation of what happens in return. And so because of that, the organization is not incentivized to use that money as efficiently as possible because of the differentiating legal structure. So it doesn't always happen, but it's very, very, very common that 501c3s trend towards inefficiency. That's one of about 10 reasons I could give you, but it's probably the most prominent and relevant to your audience.
It's like a 501c3, speaking as someone who has, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 of them. It's like a 501c3 gets like a tenth of the bureaucratic inefficiencies that the government has when you apply for C3 status. Mm-hmm. The IRS kind of like forces you into a bureaucracy and a certain way of doing things that isn't always the best way. And as Gret said, kind of removes some of the incentives to do a good job.
Yeah, you were holding up a bunch of paperwork earlier when Gret was talking about it. Was that actual 501(c)(3) paperwork? Or
that is absolutely a 1023 form from the IRS that I have sitting on my desk. But no, it is certainly valuable to be a C3 in a lot of ways, and I don't want to demean people who go down that route, especially since I've done it a couple times. But
as have I agree with that.
Especially if you're working in the charity community, it's almost like a reputation thing. Like if you're not a C3, they're like, okay, who are you?
You might just be some guy who takes money, and who knows? Who knows what happens after that?
Right. So there's some value to it, but there are not everything can be solved by charity, like the specific act of charity. And so there are certain things where it doesn't work as well, and having to report to the IRS and having certain restrictions on what you can do. And restructures you have to have, like having a board and various anti-self-interest policies, things like that can make it more inefficient.
Well, that brings me to a question I kind of want to toss out there for discussion for everybody. And Brent, you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, so maybe you could kind of pick it up here, because you had mentioned like really running, and Dan did as well, running into, actual government agencies, like maybe literally getting physically in the way of some of your work. But I just want to toss out there some of the challenges that you've all faced in bringing a lot of the visions that you have to reality, whether they're challenges from government or otherwise. But obviously that's for us libertarians, that's a pretty easy way to start, and one that's always going to be there. So take it wherever you want. But Brent, if you want to start describing some of the sort of issues that you had in delivering help for disaster relief, fire away.
Yeah, sure. People were getting back to us quite a bit during Harvey, and that's actually why we didn't do quite as much in North Carolina when North Carolina needed us more recently. Was that government only wanted to work with certain charitable organizations and certain rescue teams. Meanwhile, while they're vetting organizations and slowing the process, there were people in the water that needed help. I know people were dying in Lumberton, North Carolina. There were folks in Texas that were dying and begging for help, and we were getting stopped everywhere we went. We had supplies going in, and as I understand it, and this just comes from word of mouth from my volunteers, but there was quite a bit of FEMA stopping folks and trying to take supplies to redistribute, that they wanted supplies donated to them rather than taken to the actual victims.
Wait, so FEMA was physically confiscating supplies that you guys were in the process of delivering to people because I guess they're going to distribute it better or more fair, or is it suddenly we're in a weird socialist disaster relief philosophy here?
Yeah,
yes.
So they were pretty adamant that they were going to get it. Of course, my volunteers were mostly libertarians, so they went in well prepared, and they
with automatic weapons, I presume. Just kidding. It was recreational nukes, obviously.
Yeah, I was just about to say the recreational nukes. Yeah. No, we ran into a lot of that, and now we're running into a lot of bureaucracy issues, and we're trying to get our 501 status, and we're trying to decide the best way to go about doing that, and trying to get set up so that all 50 states can donate, because we frankly can't afford to take on the tax liability ourselves. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of similar to what Dan referenced in terms of the 501. I always confuse it. 3C, C3, whatever it is, a bunch of numbers and letters that you have to become to do certain things. Is that like, if you maintain that status, will like organizations like FEMA leave you alone more when you're going into certain places, or I mean, will that actually help you, in terms of actual delivery of services to people that need help?
It will, yeah. Getting a lot of times you have to register with simply like county level, state or county level and state level governments, and that'll help us out a lot. And then 501 is going to help us. Our 501c3 will help us to take donations from across the country and get things processed for disaster relief efforts in the future. So actually, the Liberty Coalition for Disaster Relief is taking about a year to step back, reassess what's going on, because we were just trying to keep caught up with all the disasters. we're stepping back, taking a little while to get caught up and get our paperwork filled out and make ourselves legal so that we can actually do some good work. Because it turns out when things are fairly organized through the state government like they were in North Carolina, it was just, there was no accomplishing anything.
Dan, Gret, what about you guys? What kind of sort of roadblocks have you run into, obviously besides the paperwork? And maybe that is the biggest roadblock in many ways.
In terms of government inefficiency?
Yeah, in terms of whatever you want. In terms of whatever you want to talk about. I mean, this is that's the great thing about this loosey-goosey format. We can go wherever we want. I mean, there may be, obviously we like to focus on the inefficiencies of government, but maybe there's other obstacles that I'm not even thinking of. I mean, and obviously in your case, in many instances, a lot of the projects you're working on are international. So I don't know what kind of, if you've had any sort of resistance from local government or, international local government, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to bring up is, for all of the things we could say about the U.S. government, it's kind of like this dreamland compared to some of the places that we have to work in overseas. I mean, the level of corruption, the level, I'll put it this way, at least in the U.S. they hide corruption. In other places in the world, it's just like blatant. It's just like it's out in the open, and you know that it's there. And
I'm not sure which one's
and
better.
there's just some stuff.
It's an interesting thought. Is it better to?
That's a fair point. Yeah,
could go either way.
Yeah. Yeah, at least it's like in the U.S., if you're found out to be corrupt, that's like the end of your career. In some of these other places, you're found out to be corrupt, and then you fix the next election, and then you get 4 more years. So that's kind of the difference in stuff. So yeah, I would say some of the stuff I've run into working with overseas government entities has been you just want to stay as far away from them as possible. And a lot of times it's like well-intentioned, but just so unbelievably incompetent. It's a whole different level. Yeah,
like specific examples that spring to mind in terms of something you ran into on the ground.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure. So yeah, here's a really strange thing that happened. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the book Kisses for Katie. It's about a girl who was like 19 years old who went to Uganda and she adopted 19 orphan girls, and she just lives in Uganda and she adopted all these kids. Her story became like a New York Times bestseller, and then it prompted all these other young girls to go to Uganda, and it created this like orphan industry. And so the Ugandan government, this was probably about 3 years ago, the Ugandan government basically decided, the details of this I don't have completely, but they did something to the effect of putting an end to the vast majority of orphanages in Uganda, which is not a good solution for the orphans. It's a good solution to kind of like prevent this weird influx of girls from America coming over, but at the same time, there were a bunch of orphans that were left hanging out to dry because of that situation, and it made it really difficult to start orphanages in the country of Uganda. Just a really strange incident.
Why exactly were they so concerned about the influx of young American girls? I mean, I didn't mean to be crude, but in a crude way. But I mean, just,
well, it wasn't.
What is the concern about it? Overall?
That's a good question. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily the influx of them. It was that the some of the Ugandans had learned how to take advantage of them, and had learned how to create fake orphanages and things like that. So they were like basically it was creating this industry for orphans, and then it created a demand for orphans when there was actually a greater demand for orphans than there were actual orphans. So you had to kind of create orphans, and you can do that in all sorts of different ways. Not as bad as you're thinking.
I mean, my mind's racing with a million possibilities, but yeah, ranging from the terrible.
But I mean, like the basic idea. Yeah, the basic idea is that you kind of start skewing the definition of what an orphan is. So
35-year-old guy there, he's like, I'm an orphan. I need an American girl to take care of me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean things that were kind of like stretching the definition of what it was and they were using that to get funds.
Were they trying to just like lure American women there for nefarious purposes then, or was it more like a money type thing?
It was a 100% money thing.
Give us $2,000 and we will set you up to.
Yeah. We're an orphanage, and if you send us money, we're going to build a nice big building for our orphanage, and we'll pocket half of it, but you'll get to see this nice building that we're gonna build. And so, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a money thing, and there were a lot of people who took advantage of this thing. And so the government came in, made a sweeping regulation, and not only took out a lot of the bad orphanages, but obviously a lot of the good orphanages as well. And so, yeah, how to deal with that with those things. It's a very sophisticated. It takes a lot of nuance and something that the government, especially in Uganda, did not do a good job at.
Government doesn't do nuance well. Like I realize this is like, preaching to the choir to libertarians, but government just they see they're masters at like, there's one bad apple, so we have to burn down the orchard.
So we need to ban apple. Yeah, that's even better. Burn down the
We have to
orchard.
ban apples.
All future apple production must cease. Because this one was just, it was gross.
That was
So
the most
enough of
beautiful
that.
metaphor I have ever heard. I swear to God, that was great.
And then they see some guy named Johnny Appleseed coming along, and they shoot him because he might start another orphanage or another orphanage. I'm mixing up orphanage and orchardage now. See, this is the line. This is what makes these shows fun. I drink so I can mispronounce things like my co-host Brian McWilliams, but he does it without drinking. Are there any more stories that stand out to you guys, on that end of just, I don't know if you have any, Dan, of like maybe pushback you've received at the local level? I know you specifically deal with a lot of sort of local governments and trying to get them to adopt some of the ideas behind your organization, allowing a certain amount of taxpayer dollars to go towards these private organizations that, as we said, do much better. So what kind of resistance have you run into?
I mean,
Besides all of it?
politicians hate us, like with a burning, fiery passion.
Well, you're literally there trying to make them as irrelevant as possible. So
Kinda like we're like, hey, we can like have all the people in your state do your job better than you, and it really doesn't go over well. But
would you like to help us point that out?
right. Please do a press conference with us of how irrelevant you are. But the something I can point out that really just infuriated the hell out of me, honestly, was when we were delivering disaster relief in Puerto Rico. So we were part of a 6 organization coalition. And one of our guys had a lot of experience in logistics. There was really no one else who did. So he handled a lot of the shipping, basically 24/7, 365 for 4 months in Miami and Puerto Rico. And one of the things that was absolutely infuriating to me. So you had, remember the debate between Donald Trump saying that FEMA was like the most awesome thing in the world and throwing toilet paper at people, and then the mayor of San Juan who is like, Donald Trump is evil and Puerto Ricans are dying.
I don't care what your thoughts are about Trump or any of that stuff, but Trump's doing throwing toilet paper at people as a meme is one of my favorite memes ever. Because that gets, there's one at the Notre Dame. He's like throwing in water. There's unlimited possibilities for that meme. So it's a non-political statement.
It did make for great meme material. It didn't make for great disaster relief material. And
Sure.
While FEMA was, I mean, there was one incident where Jay-Z lent our coalition his plane. The amount of rich people who lend private jets during disaster relief is like an untold story. Like you could do a documentary on it.
Maybe someone should. I mean, seriously, maybe not a documentary per se, maybe just a podcast episode or something. But I mean, for how much the wealthy are maligned, in some ways justifiably, depending on how they acquire that wealth and what they do with it, you don't really see that many stories, at least not highly publicized, of celebrities, because I never even heard about this. It's not like even Jay-Z doesn't seem like he's trying to promote necessarily all the good acts that they're doing. So that's really
and a lot of them do that, and they specifically don't want promotion. Like they don't want the attention. They do it.
Jay-Z's listening right now, going, "Son of a bitch, Dan."
Right.
Trying to be. I was anonymous.
So he lent the coalition his private plane, and we flew 20-something thousand pounds of supplies to. We actually had to tell the government that Rosie Roads was another airport, and they could land planes on it. And so
they didn't know that they had another
they
airport?
apparently they were just like, no, San Juan is the only airport, and that's it. And it's like, no, Rosie Roads is a military base, you should know about this, but whatever. So
You're like a mayor or something. You should probably. Anyway.
So we were landing planes there, and at one point we had to defend the supplies at gunpoint from FEMA because they wanted to confiscate them, and very similar to like Brent's experience with FEMA. We actually had the Puerto Rican National Guard come in and like escort the supplies off the plane so FEMA wouldn't get them.
That is amazing.
And like the mayor of the FEMA under Trump was essentially, they were scared of being blamed for another Katrina. And so their response was to lock everything down and to control everything so they couldn't possibly be looked at as bad guys. That at least from my perspective did not work. And so while FEMA was doing that, but there's a hospital ship sitting off of the coast of Puerto Rico that was not taking anybody because there wasn't any clear guidelines on how to take people to the Navy hospital ship. But that's a different story. So the mayor of San Juan refused to deliver the supplies unless they were Teamsters driving the trucks. So the two people who were like having a war on CNN and Fox over people in Puerto Rico were both screwing people in Puerto Rico, and the official death toll was the most infuriating thing while we were working on the ground in Puerto Rico. It was like 78 or 69 or some ridiculous number. I mean, there were hospital morgues that had more than 79 people in them that we knew about that were, these people had died because of the hurricane. And that's just like one morgue. I mean, the total of 1,700, 1,600 that came out recently, that's a lot more accurate. But can you imagine being on the ground in Puerto Rico? We went to Juncos. We delivered water in backpacks, and we delivered like basic supplies 2.5 weeks after the hurricane, because that's when FEMA would allow us to go in. And these people hadn't seen basic supplies for 2.5 weeks. I mean, it isn't just, I mean, it is so hard to like express the frustration and anger that we had at the federal government for, frankly, sorry for children, cover your ears, watching their own ass over this rather than actually helping people. And I'd say FEMA is directly responsible for at least 3/4 of the deaths in Puerto Rico, which were totally preventable had supplies been able to get on the ground and to people right away. And the other at least 20% of the other deaths were corrupt Puerto Rican mayors who were also confiscating supplies. So it's like the government bills itself as this place for people in need to go. And then when people are actually in need, it's everyone for themselves, and the government takes care of its own, and that's it. And that's what we saw in Puerto Rico.
But we saw the same kind of stuff coming out of Texas, the exact same stuff. We got the exact same kind of reports of death tolls being ridiculously low. And we were told that our volunteers were not being allowed in because of violence and looters and things like that, when really they were really concerned. We were told by military contractors there that, or our volunteers were. Again, everything I get is secondhand because I'm in North Carolina in my underwear. But those guys were getting told regularly that they weren't allowed in because of all the dead bodies and things that government just did not want anybody to see.
Yeah, you can't get in to save people because there's too many dead bodies. So we'll let more dead bodies happen.
And they'll define the death tolls. Like, okay, so it is reasonable, I think, that if the power goes out and someone is reliant on a respirator or they're reliant on dialysis to live, and the power goes out because of a hurricane, if they die, then that is a death attributed to the hurricane. Like, that seems to be a fairly reasonable assessment. But the way that governments have decided to attribute death tolls so their politicians don't look bad is like, you basically have to get hit by a flying telephone pole in a hurricane to be considered a quote unquote death from the hurricane. And the insult
flood deaths did not count.
Flood deaths do not count.
Right.
That seems like a pretty direct correlation. Hurricane caused flood, flood caused death.
We were told by the Cajun Navy that in Lumberton, North Carolina, they were not counting flood deaths in the death tolls.
I would think that would be one of the main death tolls.
There were bodies being pulled out of cars, flooded cars, and those were, I called something else. They were not part of the main death toll.
This illustrates just the irrational, and I think because there's so many perverse incentives in government, primarily for politicians to just look good enough to stay in office, that, I mean, something on its surface is so irrational. I mean, it's so irrational because you're just reporting what nature did. You know what I mean? This should not be something that should require a cover-up, and yet, because of the way politics are, and it's all about image, numbers are bad, numbers of deaths are bad. It doesn't matter if it was nature that caused it. Politicians are incentivized to just make things look as good as possible, regardless of if the cause even makes sense for them to cover up. And I mean, no one is going to think, well, I shouldn't say some people don't think that politicians cause hurricanes, because that's a whole different subject. But
that's for your conspiracy
we
corner.
don't have time we don't have time to get into that one. But they don't mean it in this way necessarily. But yeah, I mean, it's another example, and I think from all three of you, I've heard examples of a concept that can be very difficult to, I think, portray to people sometimes, and that's the idea that sometimes the best thing that the government can do, and by sometimes, I personally mean always, I just don't always say this to newbies, but really, for the most part, the best thing that the government can often do, especially in disaster situations, is just not do anything. It's just get out of the way. Now, I'm not talking about individual acts when there's people that happen to work for government agencies that go and save people. Even though I might disagree with the funding method and the organizational method, good. I'm still happy when people are saved. But the other end of that is all, and we've heard so many stories from all of you, the preventative end of that, where they monopolize the entire thing. Great, send in the National Guard to save people. Don't stop other people from doing the same. And that's somehow they're incentivized to prevent this quote unquote PR competition from even helping people on the ground. It's an awful incentive.
Yeah, and I think I just want to highlight what you said, because I think it's important to understand that when the government steps in and says, anytime there's a disaster, we're going to take care of it. Anytime there's someone who's in trouble, we're going to take care of it. It disincentivizes everyone else from getting involved, when it's everyone else who will be the most effective at helping the people in need in those moments. And so I find frustration with that as well. I wish that whenever something bad happens, whenever there's a disaster, I wish that there was room for individuals to get involved, because I think that's going to be everyone's best shot at having lower death tolls and having more effective help.
Right, I think that might be a better approach marketing-wise for a lot of libertarians to take. Even though I want a lot of these programs to end, maybe we spend less time advocating their end, at least to everybody else out there. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't advocate their end, but at least start with the point of, okay, keep doing what you're doing, but let us do it too. And then naturally, but there's a reason they don't do that. but naturally, which is kind of what you guys are doing overall, but specifically what Dan is doing with We Do Better, is trying to literally just show, here's why we do it better. Just let us do it. And then everyone will see, oh, this works better. And then, but the problem being for politicians, that is what will crowd them out of the scenario. And then what do? Go get a job? I mean,
in the actual workforce? I mean, can you imagine? Like, I don't know.
I do have an amazing fantasy of just like retired politicians who are irrelevant once we like stop, caring about that stuff, and they're all just like working at Walmart greeting people, and we're nice to them and they're nice to us, but we all look at each other and we kind of know what went on. And,
well, it's like during Hurricane Harvey, according to FEMA's own press release, the U.S. Coast Guard, with a $7.6 billion budget per year, the U.S. Coast Guard rescued like 2,000 or so people during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And, that is applaudable. And I know that Coast Guard rescue drivers go through a lot of training. They did some amazing work. They rescued a lot of people who wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for the Coast Guard. At the same time, volunteers from the Cajun Navy, operating off of basically gas money, because the operation was so sketch. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that in kind of thrown together. The operation was so sketchy at the beginning of Hurricane Harvey. Like, they didn't even have a donate link. Like, people could not donate to the Cajun Navy. They couldn't figure it out. Mm-hmm. And they were operating off of gas money, and they rescued 3,500 people. And so you look at stuff like that, and you're like, people see the scene. So they see the spent cost on the Coast Guard, 7.6 billion, 2,000 lives. What they don't see is the unseen. If we were able to direct that 7.6 billion to an organization that did a better job, how many more people would we have saved? How many less people would have died? I mean, that's the unseen. It's not just about money. It's a cost in lives. And whether you're looking at disaster relief, you're looking at missing children, you're looking at food security, whatever you're looking at, I think it's imperative for libertarians to just step up to the challenge and do some research. You can't just go out there and say government bad, magical free market fairy good. You gotta go out there. You gotta go out there and do some research. We've done some work for you if you're lazy at wedobetter.org. You can look at some examples, but you really gotta say, I'm a libertarian because I want to solve your problems better than the government does. Not I'm a libertarian because I want to be in a cabin with a garden and a gun in Montana, and I want people to leave me alone.
Because I want to be on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Hi, Brent. I didn't see that.
I was just thinking.
No, I mean yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that I one of the ways that I like to think about these things is the way that movements start, the way that people get behind movements that actually take off and get momentum behind them, is that there's a group of people that's for something. And one of the mistakes that libertarians I think often get into is they spend a lot of time talking about what they're against. And that's one of the reasons I love what Dan is doing. I absolutely love what Dan is doing because he's talking about what he's for. So like when it comes,
it's not called "Don't do this."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That might not be as catchy.
Suck, yeah.
Like, just don't do this thing.
These things are worse.
Bye.
Yeah. It's just to bring an example to these, like when you look at the pro-lifers, the pro-choice movement, they're both very powerful because they're both in favor of something. And whenever you have something, if it was like pro-life versus anti-life, the anti-life people would be just left to the dust.
Is it
persuasion based?
Is it ironic?
Exactly
is it too ironic to say that anti-life people would be dead?
If they were consistent.
Yeah, but
such a libertarian
not
thing
to
do,
take a
try to point
stance
out
on
their
that issue, but
contradictions.
you understand what I'm saying. Like when you're for something, it's easier to rally a group of people. It's more inspiring than.
Yeah, it's a persuasion tactic.
Exactly.
I mean, being against something just connotates negativity, and people don't get excited. I mean, literally, like the chemicals in their body don't produce the good chemicals when there's negativity, but when there's positivity, pro something, like we literally produce better chemicals that make you then want to hear our message more.
Yeah.
So we're talking biology now, but it's all true in terms of how to better persuade people to things. And that's, I don't do this show to just, talk about it amongst ourselves. I do it because I want other people to take these examples and use them and repeat them and learn from them and learn the different methods that actually work in the real world. Because as much as I love the philosophy, it's what I do. It's why I started this podcast originally, was really to explore the philosophy more. But if we're not demonstrating it and we're not providing the example and learning the best ways to persuade people that it's correct and that it works, then, we're really just, I hate the term, but we're just a social club. We're just, we're just talking about things. When we're having actions and we can actually point to them and show a positive vision, not just a vision, results, like actual things happening, it's a game changer. And that's what was so amazing. I mean, Dan was talking about how it was so no one knew how to even get the Cajun Navy money at first, and I didn't know at first either. And then suddenly they were on the DonorSee app, and it became the easiest thing to do, to donate to the Cajun Navy in seconds. And we got so many people donating to them because so many people wanted to, didn't know how. And then suddenly the app lets them do it in literally like 2 presses of a button. I mean, it's just incredible what both the concept of freedom and also new technologies are enabling us to do.
I'll just throw one more thing out there. There is a attempt. The negativity is so tempting because there is a small group of people who love that and will rally behind that with enthusiasm. And so there is that like temptation to kind of point out the negative,
to go dark.
Exactly, because people like that. There's a small group of people who will really be passionate about that. But it's the positive stuff that really can get you really, really far, especially with some of the things that are important to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, you could write a really negative tweet and it might get 100 retweets. and it changed the minds of none of those 100 people.
Oh yeah.
They already agreed with it, and it probably changed the minds of nobody else either. But some really, I'm just using a tweet as a random thing here, but a method of communication, but some really positive tweet, it might even get like less retweets and likes, but it might actually like inspire one person. So what do you want to do? Inspire 0 people, but get a lot of, social media feel good for yourself, or actually change like one person at a time? I mean, that's what's ultimately going to change everything.
Well,
for us.
it's like,
I'm in it
Go
for
ahead,
the
Brent.
likes. I was just saying, I'm in it for the likes.
Now, everybody go to Brent's Facebook and just start liking everything. Facebook.com/Brent DeRidder is on a boat, I think is the actual page.
You guys are talking about language now. So selling the idea of liberty is really important. And that shock jock style messaging, that we hate the state messaging, it's exciting for libertarians that are already libertarians.
Right.
It does nothing for the movement. And negativity just doesn't have the gas to get you where you're trying to go, man.
It'll get you like, negativity will get you going 100 miles an hour to like win the short drag race or something, but then you're out of gas and you're not going to get to, around the globe with liberty. I don't know. I'm working with some weird analogy here with race cars. I'm in Fast and Furious now. I don't know what's going on, but
it's like the mental model that I really like. So Arthur Brooks, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him, but he used to run the American Enterprise Institute, and a very prominent guy, talks a lot about messaging and how to message liberty, and he just wrote a book called Love Your Enemies, now available on Amazon. Click my affiliate link. But no, he talks about there are 4 groups of people on any issue. There are the apathetic, they really could care less. And that's most people on issues. And the fact is they're not going to care enough to do anything about it. Probably not worth reaching out to. There's the choir, the true believers, which are like, okay, you got your 100 retweets, but did you change anybody's mind? There's the persuadables, and then there's the hostiles. And what he actually recommends, and I'll add on to it a little bit, he recommends engaging the hostiles in view of the persuadables. Because when you engage the hostiles with grace and with kindness, and persuadables are watching, that's how you're going to convince people. That's how they're going to listen. And so
That's fascinating.
My recommendation to libertarians is don't just engage the hostiles, but when you engage them with better solutions. So if they're talking about Medicare for all, don't just say how bad it sucks and you think AOC is dumb. But go in and say, hey, here's Christian healthcare ministries. Hey, here's Clinica Mi Pueblo. Here are the solutions that are already out there. Or even if you don't have those, like, here's just the solutions and how they would work. Engage the hostiles with solutions, and they might not listen to you. They might not care. But the people who are watching, especially for those Facebook warriors, people on Twitter, social media, we all spend time on it. The people who are watching, they're going to start listening. And I think that I agree with Arthur Brooks that we have one of the most powerful systems known to man, that is the ability for people to raise themselves out of poverty and to have a new life for them and their children. And when we're just like saying taxation is theft, you state is slime, LOL, we're not getting anywhere. And so I think that if libertarians take one thing, it's that the word libertarian is basically a swear word in America. And if you don't start changing your messaging so it isn't a swear word, the ideas will die with the swear word. And that's not something I want to see.
Hey friends, I got to take a quick pause here to tell you about another great libertarian podcast out there. It's called Free Man Beyond the Wall, hosted by the artist formerly known as Mance Rayder, now known simply by his real name of Pete Raymond. And I gotta tell you, Pete is a machine. This guy brings you a new episode of his own every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and he has done some absolutely fantastic in-depth interviews. He's had on everybody from Ron Paul to Thaddeus Russell to Phil Labonte, the lead singer of All That Remains, a very diverse group of guests, not always libertarians. He also did a great show with a Washington, D.C. insider lobbyist, revealing a lot of the dirt that goes on behind the scenes in DC. He has done so many interviews that I have just said, darn, I wish I did this one myself. So I really do want to highly recommend checking out Freeman Beyond the Wall. You can find it over at freemanbeyondthewall.com, as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and all those fancy podcatchers out there. One more thing I wanted to toss out there for discussion before we wind down here. All of you people, all of you people, you people,
Yous guys.
all of you guys on the show today, all of you guys here, all of you guys have done something that a lot of people don't necessarily make the leap to. I think there's a lot of people out there that they see a problem, they think to themselves, here's the problem, I know what the problem is, I can even think of many solutions, and then they think, well, someone should go do that. And then it kind of stops there. You three all saw the problem, thought of a solution, and then you, instead of just hoping someone did it, you just did it. So I'm wondering if you could each kind of take a minute to give some advice to other passionate libertarians, or not even necessarily libertarians, human beings, anybody out there really who sees a problem and thinks to themselves, well, I don't really know how to form an organization, I don't know how to make an app, I don't know how to do any of this stuff, so hopefully someone will do it. What would be your advice to those people on a little bit of the why and a little bit of the how they can take this lack of knowledge, but just the sort of the revealing of a problem to themselves and turn that into actual action and create amazing change like all three of you have in your own way? I'll try to keep some semblance of order. So why don't we just start with Brent?
Look, man, I am the ultimate I can't do it guy. I'm hanging out here.
You just told me you're going to pick up and move on a boat. A boat. I don't know if I'd call you the ultimate can't do it guy, but
I'm a total Luddite, man. I am not a fan of technology. Technology is definitely not a fan of me. But my friends and I started a coalition for disaster relief, again, from our bedrooms, from our living rooms. There are people that are willing to help. If you've got an idea and you don't know how to get it done, reach out to the Liberty community. We get told that we're coldly logical, and that's true. And we get told that we have a tendency to be unempathetic. Jesus, words are hard tonight, huh?
Yeah,
unempathetic, sure. But and it's true in some cases. And we do have a tendency to tell people that it's not our problem. But in general, libertarians are the most philanthropic people I have ever met. They're the most willing and ready to jump on board any project that they think is a better solution than government. And I can only really speak to libertarians, but if you guys have an idea, scream it from the rooftops and people will join in.
Right. I mean, if you don't know how to do the things or even know how to create the things, your point is just start saying that. and there are so many people out there with skills, especially in this community of logical nerds. I mean, there's people that know how to do just about anything. So I think that's a great point. Gret, what about you?
Yeah, this is a good question, because I think there's a lot of narratives that it's not easy to start something, it's not easy to do something, it's not going to pay off or whatever. And I would say that on the most basic level, if you just attempt to do something, you will already like yourself more, you will like your life more just by attempting to do it. Even if you fail, even if it doesn't get you where you want to go, just the mere act of attempting to do something, to trying to make the world just a tiny bit better, just doing that will make you feel way better than if you do nothing. And I think that if you keep that in mind, you'll find a much more fulfilling path ahead of you.
All right, Dan, why don't you bring us home here?
I love Gret's answer. It hits me right in my heart and soul.
What that guy said. All right, good night, guys.
No, I think that you need to ask yourself what your why is. So if you're listening to this episode and you're like, I want to do something, you need to ask yourself, well, why do I want to do it? And you might say, well, it's because I've been hearing about all this stuff. And then you need to ask yourself why again. And then you need to ask yourself why again. And you need to get down to what is your personal story of why you care. You know, for me, I got in because I watched a YouTube video about an act that was taking away civil liberties. And I'd grown up reading about the Third Reich, and I was like, I don't want America to turn to that type of tyranny. I want to get involved. You need to ask yourself why. What is your why? What is your personal story? And when you get to that why, then just start telling people your story. Just start telling people your story of why you care. You don't even have to start building a movement. Just start saying, hey, I care. I care about affordable health care because my premiums went up so high that my family couldn't afford them under, the Affordable Care Act. And I just want other solutions, and I want to work on that. And you'll find people around you who care. And when you have a community of people who care, organizing them is nothing. There are organizations out there like the Grassroots Leadership Academy, a little pitch to the people I work for. They will come in, they will do free presentations on like how to organize, how to get people together. If you're part of a local group and you want to get a part of that, just look up the Grassroots Leadership Academy. They'll come in and do it. But as far as like the individual, my why was strong enough to get me up in the morning. I knew nothing. I was a freshman in college.
Couldn't even drink.
Couldn't even drink. And you know how
Legally.
good looking the girls are at like party schools? Like I had all of these, different options out there that instead of doing this, but my why was so important. It got me up in the morning. I knew nothing about speaking. My first public speech I practiced like 80 times, and I still like read from a script. So like this, all people need to see is your passion. If they see your passion, if they know your why, like Gret said, just try. And like Brent said, that there are people in the Liberty community who will come out, who will see you, who will want to be a part of that. And, you have ideas that no one else has, and we need to hear from you. And really just a small group of people listen to this podcast who do that, just can make enormous difference and enormous waves. And we'd love to have you join us.
I mean, if all the people listening to this podcast today, if even 3 get inspired enough to do the kind of work you guys have done, we've literally just created humongous amounts of change in the world. I mean, and if only 3 of you, just think about that. So thank you guys so much for coming on today and joining me for this. This is a show I've been wanting to do for a while. I've really wanted to bring together more people who are just really just creating the world that they want to see. And they're not just, philosophizing about it. Philosophizing is great. It's what I do all the time, but actually taking action and changing the world is what we're going to have to do. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because if we want to see the world change and not just, individual pockets here and there, we really have to show other people that it can work and that it does work. And you guys are all doing a tremendous job with that. So I just want to thank you again for all the work that you're doing and for coming on the show today. Thank you so much. And I do want to encourage everyone everyone listening to this, if there's one show notes episode you go to the show notes for this show. It's episode 399. You can find the show notes at lionsofliberty.com/399. I'm going to link to all of the work that you guys do. Shoot me any links that I might have missed, anything related to your announcements that I can include, but I'll link to all your organizations and make sure everyone gets more and more aware of the fine work that you guys are doing, and hopefully either helps you guys out with a lot of the projects you guys are working on, or maybe gets inspired to start their own. Either way, so glad to have you guys out there as really shining examples of what a libertarian society can and is in many ways.
And join the Lions of Liberty Pride. Damn it, Marc's been working at this for I don't know how long, and y'all need to get on board
About 5.5
train.
years, give or take. Yes. Thank you to my unpaid promoter, Dan Johnson. You can go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty for more information about how to support this show as well, if you run out of money after supporting all the great causes you've heard about today. Thank you guys so much. Keep up the great work. Keep on roaring, gentlemen. All right, friends, and I hope you enjoyed that show, that roundtable, Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor Style, with some of my favorite people in the libertarian community, the people that are really out there getting things done. Talking, doing podcasts is great. Running for office and trying to change people's minds that way, that's perfectly wonderful too. But the people that are actually out there showing how a libertarian society not only can hypothetically work, but how it does work right now through their efforts. These are some people that I'm just so glad to be able to highlight. I was able to have them on this roundtable format that I do love doing oh so much. So again, today was the 399th episode of this program, and that means a couple things. One, of course, is that you can find the very extensive show notes over at lionsofliberty.com/399. I will link to all the organizations that we discussed in today's show and all the great projects that my guests today have been working on out there. Everything is worthy of at least checking out, if not your direct financial support. Also, another announcement. If you can't do math, let me do it for you, because this is episode 399. Next episode, next Monday, is my 400th episode of this flagship Lions of Liberty podcast. I probably wouldn't still be here doing 400 episodes if it weren't for my colleagues, Brian McWilliams and John Odermatt, hopping on board and really turning this into the amazing libertarian variety show that it is. So if you're somehow new to this program and just tuning in, like I said, it's not just me here every Monday. I do have Brian McWilliams on Wednesdays slapping you upside the head with his hilarious take on comedy, current events, and liberty on Electric Liberty Land, while John Odermatt wraps things up every Friday with his extremely inspiring and hard-hitting look at the broken criminal justice system on Felony Friday. They have really helped me grow this show over the years, as have our amazing patrons, our supporters on Patreon, which you can find over at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, where we do all sorts of bonus audio all the time. So many shows. Degenerate Gamblers, Conspiracy Corner. There will be another one coming soon. I know we've had some delay, but very soon there will be a new edition of Conspiracy Corner, as well as a new edition of the League of Liberty, a very special Patreon show that I do with Chris Spangle of We Are Libertarians, Roger Paxson of the Lava Flow podcast, and Johnny Adams of Blast Off with Johnny Adams and Raylene Lightheart. These are some of my best friends in the Liberty movement. We had a blast hanging out at PorcFest last year. I encourage you to come to PorcFest this year, where all of the Lions of Liberty will be, along with Dave Smith, Part of the Problem. Scott Horton's going to be there. It's going to be a freaking blast. So do get your tickets to PorcFest. Head over to porcfest.com and check that out. And I highly, highly recommend the VIP tickets, because then you get to hang out with us in the VIP tent and have all sorts of fun times. But all of that aside, I do want to wrap things up and close by announcing what you'll be hearing next week on episode 400. I'm going to be doing a little roundtable discussion once again, this time on a very specific subject. We're going to be talking about the subject of, drumroll please, abortion. Yes, what better way to celebrate 400 episodes than to talk about a completely non-controversial subject? But abortion is one subject that even libertarians are very divided on. There are very different views on this, and I'm bringing in three people who have very strong views on this issue. One is Walter Block, who created the evictionism theory of abortion, meant to sort of compromise, not really say compromise, but he'll explain it more next episode, but to, I guess, reconcile might be the better word, the pro-life and pro-choice positions within the libertarian movement within the context of individual rights and property rights. I then have Avens O'Brien, a good friend of the show. She's been on a few times, activist out here in Los Angeles, longtime libertarian. She'll be taking the pro-choice position. And finally, representing the pro-life position, the Christian conservative himself, our friend Dave Smith of Part of the Problem has agreed to come on and represent the pro-life position, a stance he has really taken on very strongly in the last year or so upon having his own child, which really has helped to shape his views on the issue, as many listeners of his show know. So it's going to be a very, very interesting episode. I'm so excited I was able to bring this thing together for you. Tune in next week, and of course, tune in this Wednesday to Brian on Electric Liberty Land and to John on Felony Friday on Friday. And until next time, my friends,
Live long and live free.